As you will tell from what I have to say, I've been through hell the past 13 years, but no one prepared me for that flight from Calgary to Lethbridge yesterday. Plus, when I saw that the pilot was half my age, and yes, I am still pretty young. So I'm really happy to be here today in front of a full room. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'd like to thank the organizers. As they were saying in the introduction, my husband was arrested on December the 10th, 2002, which also happens to be International Human Rights Day, under a security certificate. And a lot of people ask me, why do you do this? Well, I'll tell you why. Because as you can see from, I think we can start the slideshow, I married a really hot-looking man. He's handsome. Not only do I believe in his innocence, but I also believe in the principle of justice. But the innocence there, it's not the important question. We need to remember that if you were in my husband's shoes and you were arrested and detained without charge, without access to the evidence, would any Canadian accept that process? And I think if you ask any honest person, they would say no. The problem with the security certificate process is it's a law under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act that only affects refugees and immigrants. It allows the government to arrest someone and call them a threat to national security and deport them to mostly to countries where they face torture or death. That's the big problem with the security certificate, is that you're basically kept in the dark. You have a large legal team of public counsels, but we do not have access to any of the evidence. So basically what you're giving is a report of allegations. Allegations like, we assume, we allege, we think that in the past, present, or future, this individual may have been involved in acts of terrorism or may be associated to a network. If there was nothing in the past to charge you with, there's nothing in the present. Who knows what will happen in the future? I hope some of you can make it out to the film festival tonight. I worked on a documentary. I've worked on several documentaries, actually. One with Justin Trudeau's brother, Sacha, who's also a filmmaker, several years ago. And he will explain to you the law and what we've been through for the past couple of years. So I really hope that you can make it out. But basically, the allegation report assumes, alleged, or thinks that you have done or will or may. That could be anyone at any time. For example, there's a lawyer that says, it's like you're being accused of murder, except you don't know who you killed, when you killed them, and how it happened, and you're asked to defend yourself. Like, for example, one of the allegations against my husband is that he may have been to Afghanistan. And when you're in a stand, what can you do other than deny? If you're asked, have you ever been to Afghanistan? If you've never been there, the right answer is to deny. My husband will never admit to things he's never done or admit to knowing people he's never known. In a case like a security certificate, it's kind of difficult because if you don't testify, you're hiding something. And if you do testify, then you're still a liar. It doesn't really matter. And a certificate is only ruled on reasonable grounds to believe that this person may be involved in acts of terrorism. It's the lowest standard of proof in any Canadian court. The Supreme Court, we appeared in front of the Supreme Court back in 2006, and in 2006 the Supreme Court ruled that certificates were unconstitutional, that there wasn't enough evidence for the person to defend themselves. So they gave the government 1 year to draft this new legislation. This government came up with the exact same legislation they have in the UK, which has been found unconstitutional, which is to create a special advocates. What special advocates are special security cleared lawyers that are chosen by government, that are given security clearance by government, and they're allowed to see whatever secret evidence the government chooses to give to them. But once they see that evidence, they cannot speak with the detainee or public counsel. We are in the exact same position as we are with just public counsels. So basically, in our case, it's really important to mention that the main informant in our case failed his lie detector test. He is the source to the majority, if not all, of the allegations against my husband. His credibility was never tested. And when the special advocates were put in place, we thought for sure we'd get access to the informant in secret proceedings where no one would see his face and no one would know his name. So what is the risk on national security if no one can see this person? The judge said no. And we found out probably because that individual is probably working on other cases that are related to national security. So we were greatly disappointed when our advocates were not given access to the informant because his credibility was never tested, although he failed his lie detector test. And he is the link to the majority of the allegation. Second of all, in security certificate cases, all original material was destroyed. Interviews that were done with CSIS when those individuals came to Canada, so-called intercepts they claim they have, any notes, everything has been destroyed. So Shakawi took that to the Supreme Court in 2008, and basically the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to destroy evidence, original evidence, and ordered CSIS to keep the evidence starting in 2008. So we have no original intercepts, no original interviews, we don't know which language they were from, and it's like giving an example of a telephone game. If we're 10 of us playing the telephone game and the word is probably not the same word at the end that it was at the beginning, imagine if you're getting a transcript from a transcript from a transcript from a transcript done from people that don't even know or understand the language. If an intercept is done in Arabic and that's transcribed into English from notes to notes to notes, how many errors there is. Just to give you an example, the government had exactly 1 year to draft a new legislation. At 4:55 p.m. on a Friday before the deadline, which was exactly 1 year, the exact 1 year day today. It was a Friday afternoon. We were prepared to go out on an outing. And my husband gets his new certificate, so the new report of allegation with his certificate. There's only 5 men. The cover letter was addressed to the wrong detainee. There's only 5 of them. Imagine the mistakes that are made in the back that you don't get to see and that you don't get to test. You know, all of these men, what they've said for the past 13, 14, because in Jabal and Majoub's case, they've been detained longer than my husband. My husband, we're in our 13th year. All they want is a fair trial. We want the evidence to be out on the table, and we want to be able to defend themselves openly and fairly. Like Hassan Amri says in the film, if I am a terrorist and you give me the evidence and I cannot defend myself properly, then put me in a jail and lock me up for life. But if you give me the evidence and I am able to defend myself and I clear my name, I just want a fair trial. You know, if it was in a criminal case, for example, and you destroy one piece of evidence, the case would no longer stand. Or if you want to use information that calls from an informant, the informant can be put on a stand and cross-examined. Also, the conservative government gave permission to the CBSA and CSIS about 2-3 years ago, allowed them to use evidence that comes from or derives from torture. I think we've learned from past experiences like cases like Mayar Arar and Abdullah Al-Maki that information is unreliable. They also raided our house on the eve of a hearing. And I will go through some of the conditions that I lived with for 3.5 years. And it was like a crime scene. They sent 13 CBSA officers to Ottawa Police because the CBSA doesn't have the mandate to do searches. So they have to have the Ottawa Police present and 3 sniffing dogs, 1 for explosives, 1 for currency, and 1 for drugs. And I was in the shower when they came. So needless to say, I was naked. So they came in the house and they said to my husband, we're here to do a search. I said, a search of what? Our house is under so much surveillance. We're probably, other than Stephen Harper, The most watched residence in the country. And when I will go through the condition, you will understand why I'm saying this. And they were wearing blue booties and baggies, and they opened every box of Ritz cracker and book and everything that was written in Arabic, they put in a box. They put cable, they put unidentified CDs, unidentified VHS. My address book was a piece of evidence. For 5 hours. They had mirrors, they pulled cables, they went through every drawer, even they went through my underwear drawer. We had this big argument. Who went through the underwear drawer, Mrs. Harkat? Was it a woman? Was it a man? Was it unconstitutional? It doesn't matter whether it was a man or a woman. The whole thing was found unconstitutional. The reason why they raided our house was on the eve of a hearing, a reasonableness hearing, so they could find so-called evidence. Evidence of what? Because what we found out was that the Canadian Border Service Agency, the CBSA, was going to lose their powers to do a search. And they needed to do at least once before they lost their powers. After my husband was arrested, he was put in jail for 43 months. What do you do with someone who's never been charged? Do you put them in a provincial detention center? Do you put them in a federal detention center? So they put them in provincial detention centers, but provincial detention centers are not equipped to deal with inmates that are in there for years and years and years. In the case of Hassan Amar, he spent 7 years in isolation. Multiply that by 3. So if you serve a sentence, you multiply that by 3 for something he's never been charged of. 43 months, first year in isolation. For the first couple of weeks, he only got 1 shower a week. He didn't get a toothbrush for the first 10 days. He didn't get a Quran for the first 4 months. He had nothing to read in his cell other than look at the 4 white walls. He was treated like the worst criminal on the planet. But I can tell you right now that inmates in the jail, though, they understood that a guy without charge doesn't belong in jail. My mentality of inmates has changed quite a bit. There's a lot of innocent people in there, and those inmates, they know the law. They know the law. They know what they did to go in there, and they know how things work. For example, my husband didn't have a razor for months. And when we were set to go to court, my husband says, I don't want to go to court. I look like Bin Laden. And I said, well, Bin Laden's kind of cute. He's got nice eyes. But that's not what really upset me. He said, my mustache drags over my lip, and when I eat, it goes into my food. And that really, really upset me. So I stood in that glass box, because for those of you, I bet you the majority of you have never been into a jail. You go in front of general population with about 10 to 12 inmates, and you go in front of a maximum security. And in isolation, it's a glass box, and you're shackled from the wrist to the waist to the waist to the ankles. And you're watched by lots of guards in your glass box, and you're like talking like this on a phone that doesn't work. In a provincial detention center, you have no human contact whatsoever. For 3.5 years, I had 2 visits of 20 minutes with my husband. So I stood in that glass box and I said, I am not leaving until I'm guaranteed that he gets a razor. And I was told several times, your time is up, you're not going to get more visits. And I stood my grounds. But my husband, I could see the fear in his eyes, because what I said on the outside, he paid the price for on the inside. Well, he got that woman's razor, Bic razor. Took him 5 hours to shave that beard. The next visit, he had toilet paper all over his face. But he did get a shave. After that, it's like, what do you do with those inmates? They're in there for years. So they build their own facility. We called it the Guantanamo North of Canada. Same concept as Guantanamo, Cuba. It's 2 portable units that they just welded together that was put on the grounds of the biggest jail in Canada, the Kingston Penitentiary. It was surrounded by 3 sets of barbed wire. It was divided in 6 cells. Portable units that cost $3.5 million to build. And that jail ran empty for years after Mr. Majoub was released on bail. Empty at $2.2 million a year cost. After the first Supreme Court challenge, my husband, just before the Supreme Court challenge, my husband got released on bail. And we thought, wow, finally, he gets released on bail. Wonderful news. We were willing to do anything to get him out on bail. But what we didn't know were how we were going to live through the conditions. Mr. Majoub's himself decide to go back to jail because the conditions were so severe on his family that he decided himself to go back to jail. And the judge says, we've never done that. Put someone back in jail because someone wants to go back in jail after 7, 8 years of detention. My husband, several times he offered to go back. It was out of the question, but let me tell you, boy, did it cross my mind a few times. Imagine being separate for 3.5 years. You speak behind glass, you visit your husband, and from one day to the next, you're stuck together 24/7. Yes, you heard me, couples who've been married for a long time. 24/7. Because I am become his main surety. The court ruled me as his main surety. I have to watch him in the house 24/7. Everything about him got on my nerves. Where he put his shampoo bottle, now he wanted my side of the bed, now you want to eat this for breakfast. And for 3.5 years, he was told what to do and how to do it. Going to Tim Hortons for the first time to pick a donut took forever because you're so institutionalized. You know, you're used to being told what to do and how to do it. So these are some of the conditions that my husband had to live with for many years. So the minute you get out of jail, what they do is put a GPS on your ankle. I'm not sure if you've seen some of the pictures, but a GPS is quite chunky. It's a big piece that never comes off. People think you can just take that thing off when you shower and you swim. No, that thing never comes off. And I've slept with a guy who wore a GPS for 7.5 years, and let me tell you, when he turns in bed and that thing whacks you on the ankle, you want to die. It hurts. For 7.5 years, my husband, he didn't wear shorts. And that's okay with me, because as long as he's hot up here, he's got the ugliest legs. So I was okay with that. But just to say, like at 40-degree weather, he never wore a pair of shorts. That's something that people don't think of. We had 2 surveillance cameras in our home at each entrance. And those cameras are on 24/7. So I was his main surety. My mom was his second one. My mom has a full-time job. She has her own music business. I would do 95% of the surveillance. That means you're with him 24 hours, 7 days a week. And there was a priest in our community that was in his mid-80s that would be the only person who could cover. But every time I put him in charge, I was always be a little bit worried that he would forget some of the conditions. We were allowed to go out 3 times a week for a maximum of 12 hours. Every outing had to be pre-approved in advance. Every location, every person we spoke to had to be pre-approved. We had to pre-approve the route that we were going to use. Between 48 to 96 hours in advance. Every outing we went to, we were followed by CBSA officers, Canadian Border Service Agency. Between 2 to 4 to 6 to 8, between 1 to 4 car, depending on the outing. And for those of you who've never come across a CBSA border agent, those people wear bulletproof vests and they carry weapons. And they look like police officers. My niece, who was 6 years old when my husband first came out of jail, we told her, you will be the first outing that we get to do with you when Uncle Mo gets released. And by the way, my niece didn't speak a word of English when my husband got arrested, so she would visit him occasionally and he would do collect calls. And the only word that she knew how to say was good. So he would say, how are you doing today? Good. How's school doing? Good. So we took her to the mall to pick out an outfit and to go to the restaurant with her. And she asked me, are they going to follow us the whole time? I said, they will. They have to. But they're so good, you're never going to know they're there. About half an hour into the outing, my niece stood in the middle of the mall and she says, I know exactly where they are. So I said, okay, well, you go ahead and tell me, because Aunt Sophie, she cannot point at them because it puts their security at risk. Because my security, it's not important. It's their security at risk. And by the way, when those people were following us, I had no more personal space. I complained about how close they were, about a feet behind me with their walkie-talkies, turning on the left, turning on the right, ordering chicken. For years, for 3.5 years, I heard that walkie-talkie everywhere I went. I complained about the distance they were at. And they said, Mrs. Harkat, you no longer have a personal space. They decided that for me. So she's in the mall, and I said, okay, so you go ahead and you point at them, because Aunt Sophie's going to get in big trouble if she points at them. She says, this guy right there. I said, why him? Because I went to a kid's shoe store and a kid's clothing store and a kid's toy store, and he doesn't have any kid, and he's always there. And this guy right there, and I said, why him? Because his jacket matched. A 6-year-old could figure it out. Our calls were monitored. Our mail was intercepted. Our Christmas cards were opened. Our Val packages were open and labeled. Our flyers, our McGinty MP flyers were labeled and open. I was not allowed to have a wireless device in my house. I have a computer which was under lock and key and a pad key, which I had to do. So my husband never saw the internet or never used a computer for 12 years. Just last summer, he got access to his first computer. He's now allowed to use a home computer only, which is being monitored. He had never seen the internet. He had never seen his website. He had never received an email. And let me tell you, he loves the email. He loves internet, and he's way better at it than I am now. But these are things that you take for granted, you know. We had a curfew within in our own backyard. 9 o'clock was our curfew in the backyard. For example, we barbecue. It's barbecue season. I step out, he steps out. Oh, forgot the salt. I step in, he steps in. And we have surveillance cameras to watch us. And we have CBSA officers parked in front of our house for hours. And when we go out, they know what we purchased. They open our mail. They see what's on our credit card. They listen to our telephone conversations. For many years, they recorded that over 3.5 years, I was recorded saying over 300-something times, "I will talk to you in person." Because there's no way I was going to talk about personal issues on the telephone when I knew CBSA and CSIS recorded our telephone conversation. They were also another violation of the charter, unconstitutional, is that they listen to solicitor-client calls for years, and we know that's the most sacred privilege there is between as an inmate and their counsel. So basically, judge said to the government, bad boy. And they did it again. They did it twice. I'll give you an example of what it was like to go out on an outing when you have only 4 hours. And for example, what do you do when you need to go to the public washroom? What do you do? So, ladies, it's nasty in those men's washroom. That's all I can tell you. I've had to sneak into men's washroom. I've tried to sneak him in women's washroom more often because in some places it was just not pretty and I wouldn't do it. But we had this technique going where, okay, you go, okay, I put my back to the door and I watch everything. One time only, in a shopping center that was pre-approved and we were watched by 4 CBSA officers. My husband said, I really have to go. The washroom was full. Every stall was taken. So I said to my husband, I cannot go in. So what I'll do is I'll put my foot in the door here and I'll look at your feet underneath the door. So he went in, right away the CBSA, all went in. 2 weeks later, we get a letter from the government saying they want to put my husband back in jail because he violated his conditions. He was left alone in that public washroom. Because in that specific time, he could have met Bin Laden in that specific stall at specific time in that specific mall. What do you do in a change room? You have to bring him in. Gynecology appointments. What do I do when I have a doctor appointment? I can't leave him alone at home. My mom works all day, so I have to get my doctor pre-approved and bring him, have my gynecology appointment. And he sits in a corner to pretend and read a big medical magazine. And my husband speaks very poor English. He used to call himself a presumed tourist when we first met. You know, when he was in jail, he said, he didn't even know what discrimination was. He had failed an English test just before that at Algonquin College. And after that, he understood exactly what security certificates were. He knew the meaning of the word discrimination. For example, we went to a movie. 10 years ago, a couple of years ago, there was a very popular movie called Good Cop, Bad Cop. Well, the good CBSA officer sat in front of us and the bad one sat behind. And the one in front, he really enjoyed the movie. Then you go to Costco and there's all these little samples on weekends. Well, they have a full lunch by the time they're out of there. They do the groceries at the same time we do our groceries. And let's not forget, every location is pre-approved. I forgot to mention that every person that enters our residence has to be pre-approved, have a criminal background check, provide a photo ID, including my nephew, who was born after my husband was released. My nephew only knows Uncle Mo as Uncle Mo. He doesn't know nothing about the allegation. He knows him as Mon Oncle Mo. His name is Momo. Even the GPS we managed to hide from him for so many years. The GPS had to be plugged 2 hours a day. So he sat next to an electrical outlet for 2 hours a day to recharge his GPS. So our nephew comes over for a sleepover, and he comes in a room and he says, "What's that?" So my husband says, "Well, you know how people, they like to wear their watch on their wrists? Well, I like to wear mine around my ankle." He says, "Well, that's a really big watch, Uncle Mo." But my 80-year-old grandmother had to get pre-approved, and some of my friends didn't get through because some of the activists, they have small criminal records for trespassing or trying to protest for rights and democracy, and there's some kind of list out there. We went to see another movie. It was called God Almighty. And because of the religious title to it, they decided to send 4 officers that day. It was a comedy about Steve Carell building a Noah's Ark. It was a terrible, terrible movie. I wanted to die. It was so bad. It was so bad. I prefer foreign movies or good Quebec movies with subtitles, but my husband doesn't read fast enough to do those movies. So we have to always pick something light or one of those American movies I really don't like. But just to tell you, I was really suffering. So my husband says, well, since we have another location, let's go to the other pre-approved location. I said, no way. They're sitting through that movie, the whole movie. They're staying right here. I'm not going nowhere. For Christmas, for example, they gave us an 8-hour pre-approved outing. So we would go to my sister, and when we have our meal there, we wouldn't go anywhere else, and CBSA would sit in a running car for 8 hours watching us. When I'm there and my mother's there, and everything has been pre-approved, the location, the people has had criminal background check and everything, they would follow us everywhere. They would take notes of everything. They would follow us on our daily exercise. They would have their faces like that in windows when we were in small stores. I have one anecdote because I know I'm reaching towards the 30 minutes. They were even present at my grandfather's funeral. But just to give you an idea, for years and years and years, I was followed. I'm a Canadian citizen. It's a security certificate that affects refugee and immigrants. Wrong. It affects everyone that knows or loves or is friends or supports my husband. Because when we were out on an outing, for example, and we're grocery shopping, and this 70-year-old lady recognizes my husband from the media, the first thing she wants to come to do is give him a hug. But he's doing his grocery like that, and she is not pre-approved. She slid her hand over my husband's wrist, waist like that. She says, I'm so happy to see you out. Because no one has ever come up to us in public and say, go back to where you come from. People want him to get a fair trial because everybody wants to see that evidence. So anyways, for years I heard that sound, that walkie-talkie. I was at the point when I was my breaking point. So one night we're in a Shoppers Drug Mart and there's 15 minutes left of the outing. There is a robbery in the Shoppers Drug Mart, so we get in lockdown and the police surrounds the building. So I said to my husband, I panicked a little bit. I said, we'll get ourselves out of it. I'll go over, explain the situation. I take my receipt, my ID. I tell the officer, I said, do you mind if I leave my information if there's anything I need to get out of here? Nobody wants my husband. Only the CSIS wants my husband. So he has got no criminal record anywhere. None. He doesn't have a record. The RCMP doesn't want him. The Ottawa Police doesn't want him. My husband passed the security clearance with the Ottawa Police for a job. And most of the time, the OPP and the RCMP will come up to us and say, you know, we're not okay with what CSIS is doing. We would never arrest someone without charge. Anyways, I have my own opinion about that. But we get that all the time. So just as I'm about to get myself out of the situation, the CBSA officers managed to get through the doors and they get into the Shoppers Drug Mart. So they come in with their bulletproof vests and all that, and I'm at the point where I'm swearing like a sailor. I'm yelling, I'm a Canadian citizen! Trying to make a point here. I'm a Canadian citizen. Why am I being followed by those people? And the OPP looking at me panic, and they don't know who those people are. So they take out their badge. And they say, Sophie, it's an exceptional circumstance. I'll put that in my report. Said, last time you told me it was an exceptional circumstance with that washroom incident, and you wanted to put him back in jail. Or that we went on a yellow light, and you said he violated his condition, peace, and good behavior. Listen, I'll solve my own problems. So they're looking at each other, calm down, calm down. I said, no. So they take out their badge, and they show the younger officer, like that. And the younger officer looks at his superior, and they say, we're the Canadian Border Service Agency. And the officer looks at his superior. The superior looks at, no, I don't know that badge. We're the CBSA.